All right, we're going to call to order this meeting of the Tennessee Advisory Council on Workers' Compensation on Tuesday, October 4, 2016 at a few minutes after 2 p.m. in the Legislative Plaza Room, 29, Nashville, Tennessee. I want to welcome you to the meeting. I'm David Lillard, Tennessee State Treasurer and Chair of the Council. The first thing we're going to do is, after calling the meeting to order, we're going to call the roll. Mr. Scroggs, our administrator, will call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gary Dove. Bruce Fox. John Garrett. Bob Pitts. By telephone, yeah. Paul Shaver. Here. Gary Selvey. Here. Chairman Lillard.
Here.
Moving to the non-voting members, John Burleson. Jason Denton. Sandy Fletchall. Keith Graves. John Harris. Lynn Lawyer. Jerry Mayo. Is it?
Yeah.
Dr. Merle. Mr. Ramos. Pam Smith.
Okay,
Mr. Chairman, you have a physical quorum.
All right, we've got our ex officio members, Ms. Abby Hudgens, present, representing the Commissioner, hello, and also Mr. Shinnick, representing the Department of Commerce and Insurance. Okay, so we'll show them present as well. All right, very good then. Let's see, we have the next item of business is to approve the minutes of the March 21, 2016 meeting, which is in the little manila folder that you have here. If you want to look at those. Also, we had a meeting, of course, on August 23rd that was an informal informational meeting because we did not have a quorum present. We had a presentation by NCCI and others at that particular meeting. And Mr. Scroggs is going to put some meeting notes in the minutes for that, but it will not be officially approved as an official meeting. But as to the March 21 minutes, do we have a motion for approval of those? We have a motion. Is there a second? We have a second. All right. Any discussion on the minutes? All right. Yes, Mr. Ramos. Yeah. Let's get it going here. There we go. That's all right. Okay, we'll do this by voice vote. All those in favor of approving the minutes March 21 signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the minutes are approved. All right, the new business we have to consider today under Section 4A of the agenda is the actuarial review of the voluntary loss cost filing by the NCCI, proposed to be effective March 1, 2017. We have a presentation by Mary Jean King of By the Numbers Actuarial Consulting, BINAC, who is the actuary for the Advisory Council. Ms. King, welcome. Be sure you turn on that mic there by punching the little button at the bottom of it. It should be a green button or something that comes on.
Can everyone hear me?
Pull that microphone a little closer to your, there we go. Yeah, you got to kind of talk right in it like I'm doing here, okay?
Well, luckily I'm loud. So
okay, good. All right. All right.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Mary Jean King. I'm here for By the Numbers Actuarial Consulting, BINAC, and I've been commissioned to review the NCCI filing with an effective date of March 1st, 2017. In August, Anne Marie Smith from NCCI presented the filing to the committee, and I thought I would just help you recall her presentation and go over the process a little bit, so that'll help you understand where the differences come in my evaluation. So basically in this filing, there are 4 things that were contributing to the proposed change in voluntary loss cost level. The proposed change overall is negative 12.8%. The first component is experience. And as you may recall, the way NCCI starts is by using the financial call data, and they take the losses and the premium from that call data, and there were no concerns with the data this year. And they estimate the ultimate value. They take the historical data and they also adjust it to reflect the current experience loss cost level and any statutory benefit level changes that have happened. So that's the first step, and that obviously the negative 9.8% is NCCI's overall contribution or impact from the experience of the negative 12.8%. And so that's really the meat of the filing this year, is the experience. That's what's driving this large decrease. BINAC also went through that process. We selected somewhat different loss development factors, and the overall impact using BINAC's analysis is a negative 7.3%. After you have that historical data developed to an ultimate level and brought onto the statutory benefit level, then you apply trend factors. And that's to account for expected inflationary changes between the historical loss experience and the time period during the upcoming effective date of the loss costs. In this filing, the impact of NCCI's change in trend factors is a negative 3.8%. BINAC selected somewhat different trend factors, and the impact on our recommendation is a negative 2.6%. The next is a loading for loss adjustment expense. The provision for loss adjustment expense is applied to account for expected defense cost and containment expenses, as well as adjusting and other expenses. In this filing, NCCI is recommending a slight increase in that loading for loss adjustment expense, and the impact is a 0.3% increase. And BINAC is recommending no change, so that's a 0.0%. The final two components of the change are the change to the benefit level of the upcoming period, and also an offset for a change that was done to the maximum minimum premium in the assigned risk. And there's really no argument between NCCI and BINAC as to what those adjustments should be. There we go. So what would I like to, yes?
Mr. Mayo's recognized.
Did you confirm you had 100% of the data?
I believe that's correct this year. Was there one company? There was one company that was excluded, and that was because it was in liquidation. Right. But they're almost gone. Right. I think they're not in 2014, but they are in 2013. That's my understanding.
Well, the concern I have is if they're in liquidation, they're there primarily because they had bad comp results. So
they did not report the data. They were given an allowance, I believe, and really Emery would be better to answer this question, but I believe that when in liquidation, they sometimes the state says, well, you don't have to report your data. So they don't have the information. They can't give it because they don't have it. I think it's Lumberman's. I believe it's Lumberman's.
Underwriting Alliance is who it is, Jerry. And I don't recall there being
Mike, for some reason your mic's not on down there. Can you see if you can, is it just not working? Can you share one? Use the other one, yeah. There we go. Start again if you would.
It's the company is Lumberman's Underwriting Alliance. I don't recall them having a large amount of premium in Tennessee. Anne-Marie may have the exact numbers. 0.1%. 0.1%.
In one policy. Right, and by 2014, they had stopped writing. So it would only affect the 2013 policy year for
Right.
NCCI. Right, so, based on that comparison of what's driving the filing, it seems like the experience is the thing that we should look at most closely. So I'm gonna try something that I haven't tried before, and that's I'm gonna try and look at a comparison of the estimated ultimate losses that we have in this filing compared to the estimates we used in last year's filings. It's a little bit difficult to do that because it is always a changing mix of companies, but I tried to make an adjustment, and so I'm going to be showing you a comparison. I'm also going to show you what the projected cost ratios are based on Binax analysis, and then that will lead to Binax overall indication. I want to give you an update on the loss adjustment expense information that I gave last year. And then lastly, I'll go over my own findings compared to the NCCI filing. All right, so this is a graph, and the first thing I want to point out about this graph is you're only looking at the top half of the graph. So I've cut it off so that you can see the differences a little bit better on the slide. But it's an estimate of the ultimate indemnity incurred losses using different methods and also different evaluations of the losses. As you might remember, last year, for the first time, we started using a second method to estimate ultimate losses. Prior to last year, we only used the Paid+Case development method. And last year, we started using the paid development method in addition, which I think is a good thing to do. Having two methods provides a little bit of a check and balance. But I wanted to look back and see, well, how do our estimates this year compare to last year's estimates? So I'm showing you 5 policy periods, 2010 through 2014. As you can see, for 2014, we don't have prior estimates, so there's only 2 estimates for the most recent year. The blue estimates are based on the paid development method. The green estimates are based on the Paid+Case development method. The darker ones are the current evaluation, the lighter ones, the prior evaluation. And the black line is what we are selecting this year. And by we, I mean NCCI. All of these are NCCI's estimates. And the red is what we selected last year. And as you can see for indemnity, one thing you'll see is, a downward trend. That's partly because these are just the historical losses. They have not been adjusted for trend. But still, even with that adjustment, you would see some downward in the total movement in the total losses. But overall, you can see that the 4 methods, both the Paid+Case this year and the Paid+Case last year, are pretty close in these older years. The 2 lighter Paid+Case were close to each other. The 2 new ones are close to last year's estimates. And the selections are all very close. In 2012, they're almost exact. And one thing that I also liked, if you focus in on that 2012 year, last year the paid method was higher than the incurred method. NCCI selected the average. And this year, both methods, the Paid+Case came up, the paid came down, and now it almost exactly matches. So that's great. That's all good news, and that's what you like to see. It's common to see that the methods are closer in the older years because more of the claims are closed, so a lot of it you're not really estimating. You know the answer. In the more recent year, the 2013 year, the prior estimates were both higher than they are now, but the 2 paid and Paid+Case have come together at a lower number this year. And 2014 is looking like an even lower year. But all of this, I would say, is within the realm of what you might expect. Another thing that I like to see is that the red line is above the black line in some years and below it in other years. So there's a give and take as to how the estimates are changing. So I think for indemnity, things are moving along pretty well as expected. Medical is a little bit different story. As you can see, the estimates for medical are a lot more volatile. When we look at those estimates from last year, they are much higher. The red line is higher than the black line in every one of the prior years. So for the medical loss, all of our estimates came down from last year. And the 2013 year has really a very big change. So when we were looking at 2013 last year, we had a paid estimate, the light blue line, and a Paid+Case estimate that were, pretty close to each other. But now the new estimates, the darker blue and the darker green, are both much lower, and especially the change in the Paid+Case from being higher than the paid estimate to much lower than the paid estimate this year was a big decrease. That change in the 2013 year is really driven by the experience that we saw, which was very unusual. We look at, when we're using these development factors, we look at how the losses are changing from period to period. The medical losses for 2013, we would call that change a change from the first report to the second report. And that factor this year was actually less than 1. So the incurred losses for the whole industry decreased for medical from the first report to the second report. I have 10 years of Tennessee data, and we have not seen that happen before. I did ask NCCI to investigate that, and they were able to see that it was mostly caused by 3 large losses. In fact, those 3 losses, I think they accounted for $7.5 million of the $8.6 million decrease. So we don't think it's really a trend. The 3 losses were not for the same company. It was 3 different companies. And one thing that all 3 actuaries did was we did not use that loss development for that 2013 policy year in our selected going forward. So all 3 actuaries used a method where we sort of threw that one out to select. But even when you do that, you're still starting at incurred losses that are much lower than they were last year. And so this volatility that we're seeing in the medical, I think really points to the need for a longer experience period in coming up with the indication. If you look at that 2013 year, last year, the 2 years that went into the NCCI filing was 2012 and 2013. And that 2013 year, there's really a large gap. So that was 50% of your filing basically was based on losses that we think were overestimated given what we know now. I do think it was an unusual year. I don't think this is what usually happens, but it's something to keep an eye on and something that I think we could lessen the impact of that if we used a longer experience period. Are there any questions on that? All right, so NCCI goes through and selects their loss development factors. They use a 2-year average for the paid and a 5-year average for the Paid+Case, with the exception of that 1 year that I told you about with the medical. BINAC goes through, and we do look at 2-year averages, 3-year averages, 5-year averages, 5-year average throwing out the high and the low. We look at several averages, and we make a little bit more judgmental decision. I think that's a good thing for a review actuary to do. One of the reasons NCCI likes to use a method is so that you don't introduce any of your own bias into what you're doing. But I think as a review actuary, I can incorporate some of my own judgment. And when I do that, these are the estimates that BINAC comes up with for the projected cost ratios for the upcoming period. So BINAC looked at 5 years, and this would be the medical and indemnity added together at ultimate and trended to the upcoming period. So each of these years would represent an estimate of what we think the projected loss cost ratio would be in the upcoming year. So it could be a 1.012 if we have experience similar to 2010, but it could be a 0.887 if we have experience similar to 2013. BINAC's selection of 0.907 is based on an average of the 4 years, 2011 through 2014. I used a longer experience period due to the volatility that I'm observing in the medical, but clearly to me, that 2010 year, it seems like that is outside the range of what we would expect going forward. One thing you can see is that the NCCI selection of 0.871 is lower than all of the cost ratios that BINAC came up with. That's partly because the trend factor is different. So BINAC selected a slightly higher trend factor than NCCI did, and that contributed. But even if you took away that result of the change in the trend, if I used NCCI selected trend, I would still only have 1 year that was below that 0.871. The NCCI recommendation of 0.871 is an average of the 2013 and 2014 projected cost ratios. All right, on loss adjustment expense, we've talked about that a lot in the past. And last year I showed a very similar slide. When we're coming up with the loading for loss adjustment expense, we start with NCCI's accident year developed loss adjustment expense ratios. And the problem in the past has been a persistent decrease. These estimates should be an estimate of ultimate, and yet when we would look at it from year to year to year, they kept going down. And NCCI has really tried to address that problem with a few different methodology changes. Last year, there was another one in which they added a paid tail factor to their process. And so I did want to show, last year when I looked at the estimates using data evaluated as of 12/31/14 and 12/31/13, every year was a decrease. And the most recent years were all decreases of 0.004 to 0.006. This year, we see some years decreased and some years increase, which that's a big step forward. That's a lot more closer to what you would expect and what you would want. I'd like it better if the increases and decreases were interspersed, but I do think this is an improvement, and I think it's a reason to either keep the loss adjustment expense loading at the approved level from last year of 19.8%, which I get if I use a somewhat longer average of the past years than NCCI did, or you could go with the NCCI indication, which is slightly higher, and that's due to the more recent higher experience. So what are my findings? The first and most important finding is that the proposed change of negative 12.8% effective March 1st, 2017 has been reasonably calculated in accordance with actuarial standards of practice. Everything that NCCI did, I feel, was reasonable from an actuarial perspective. Anything that I'm recommending is really differences in judgment. I do think that the volatility that we're seeing in the estimated ultimate losses for medical especially really supports the use of a longer experience period in choosing the indication for the upcoming period. The NCCI selected trend factors are 0.950 for indemnity and 0.985 for medical. These are slightly less than the 15-year fit. The reason NCCI selected something less than the 15-year fit is the more recent fits, the 10 and the 5-year, are lower. The BINAC selections of 0.955 and 0.990 are only slightly different, but they are the exact 15-year fit. The NCCI LAE provision is 20.1%. BINAC's recommending that we stay with the current provision, which is 19.8%. Overall, NCCI's recommendation is negative 12.8%, and BINAC's recommendation would be a negative 9.5%. Are there any questions?
All right, any questions? All right, Mr. Mayo is recognized.
Help me out. You said that the differences between the two is more judgment than
More judgment than, pardon me?
than results.
I would say that the experience is driving the decrease. And the difference between a decrease of negative 12.8% and a difference of negative 9.5%, so NCCI's indication and FINAC's, that's a little bit more judgment. I do think that there are things to recommend. What FINAC is doing as far as using a 4-year average experience period in selecting the indication. I do think perhaps the 2-year period, especially in this year where we have what's a noticeably odd situation with the 2013 policy year, so only using an average of 2013 and 2014, I think, could lead to a lower indication than maybe we'll see when it all
But
plays
you don't have
out.
a problem with NCCI's recommendation?
I do not have a problem with it.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions for Ms. King? All right, seeing none, thank you very much, okay? Good presentation.
Thank you.
All right, next we have item 4B on the agenda. It's the actuarial review of the voluntary loss cost filing by NCCI. This presentation is by Chris Burkhalter of Bickerstaff, Watley, Ryan, and Burkhalter, Inc., actuaries for the Tennessee Department of Commerce and Insurance. Welcome, Mr. Burkhalter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is my third presentation in front of the council, and all of them have been rate decreases. You guys are in a very good place right now. You've had 4 straight decreases in loss costs that cumulatively take you down over 20%, and your actuaries here today are talking about reading the tea leaves on either side of a -10, so I hope you guys enjoy this. It's not always like this.
Hey, Bob, we're just holding on here just a second while they get a little technical thing straightened out. Uh-huh.
Okay, we're ready to go.
Okay.
Bob, we weren't going to leave you behind. The major areas of review. This is going to kind of follow the structure of what you've seen from BINAC, because really these were the areas we concentrated on as well. And the major areas of review, we're going to talk about the loss development factors. That's really the reason that after over 20% downward loss cost revision, you're still looking at such a large indicated decreases, because the loss development, as you're going to see in a moment, over the last 12 months was so remarkably below what it has been historically. We're also going to look at the loss ratio trends, which are very favorable for you as well, both frequency and severity. We're going to look at that LAE provision selection, and then I'm going to concentrate most of my talk on the experience period and the differences there. First of all, we'll talk about the loss development, and I'm not going to take you through all of the triangles and things like that. I'm going to concentrate basically on one segment of this, just to show you the full impact of what the last 12 months has brought. What you're seeing here is a loss development for, first of all, it's medical, so we're just going to isolate on that for a second. Paid+Case, so it's paid losses plus case reserves as posted. I want you to look first at the blue bar on the left. And what you're going to see there is what that means in the 1 to 2 column is that if you looked at a bucket of claims that were 1 year old and you looked at their Paid+Case losses, then you came back a year later and looked at them when they were 2 years old. Over the last 10 years, that's the blue bar, you would have seen an increase of 3.8%, just shy of 4%. And then you can see for each age bucket, for each development period, how much that 10-year average is. Okay, so that's kind of representative of the history of medical incurred losses for you in the state. Now look at the last 12 months, and you see, obviously it's a very distorted factor in 1 to 2. That distortion comes from 3 big claims where reserves were taken down heavily. But if you keep stepping farther out, you'll see that those orange bars sit below the blue bars all the way out to the 6 to 7. And that was really, the magnitude of that was profound. Mary Jean showed you some loss numbers to really indicate. So that's really what's driving here. Last year, I'd thrown up a graph where I'd shown there was actually some adverse development in recent years, farther out in this, in the 5 to 6 range and things like that. That really has kind of reversed this year. So whereas last year we were selecting a 3-year average of loss development, we have now changed that to a 5-year to incorporate a more longer term. Had a very minor effect on the indications. So that's the first thing. The other thing was the tail factor. The tail factor is the development factor from about 19 years out. In the past, we had selected our own that varied from NCCI. The analysis we ran showed that that our indications and theirs had converged to a degree that we had basically just adopted their tail factor without any change. Okay, moving on to trend. We look at 3 different trends, trends in claim frequency, and then claim severity for indemnity and medical. Now, the picture you're seeing here is one that is being seen all over the country long term, and that's a long-term downward trend in claim frequency from the mid-90s on. We've thought this would reverse itself at times, and at times in certain states you get upticks or a 2-year uptick, and then it seems like it reverses itself. For you guys, it's extremely favorable. Going back to about 2000, your all-year trend there shows a minus 1.8. That same number last year when I stood up here was a minus 1.6. So the frequency trend has accelerated in the downward direction, and we've seen that for a couple of years. You'll notice the shorter year trend, the 5-year trend, is at a minus 4.4. Last year, that was a minus 2.1. So that's a stark difference because you dropped off one of these points, and you've got basically what I'd call a black ski slope here now, where you're heading down at a very rapid pace. That little hump in 2008 to 2010 roughly, I think, corresponds to economic downturn and then recovery is what you're seeing. Based on the number of cranes I see around this town, I think you guys are doing pretty well. So that's claim frequency. Now, if we'll go on to claim severity. First, indemnity. These are lost time wages, and the all-year trend here is a minus 2.6. So everything's kind of working in the right direction to put downward pressure on loss costs. A very high correlation there. You see a 95.2% correlation, and that's basically just a mathematical measure of how tightly that red line fits that blue line. The reason that's important is the closer it fits, the more predictability will lend to this trend. If it hops around a lot, then you tend to give it less credibility. The 5-year trend is a little below the all-year trend. It's a minus 2.9, so that indicates that this trend is accelerating a bit. So for indemnity, when we marry the frequency and the severity together, we selected a trend of minus 4.5% per year. I think most actuaries would tell you any kind of negative trend gives us heartburn, but this is obviously persistent and predictive, and so we did use it. NCCI picked a minus 5, so at a minus 4.5, we're a little more conservative, and actually BINAC picked a minus 4.5 as well, completely independently. Medical severity is a little less correlated, but the fact that this is not going up at 7 to 8% a year means you're doing better than a lot of the country, because this is a trend that tends to be a little more in the north direction. You see the all-year trend still has a little bit of an uptick to it if you look all the way back to 2000. It's a plus 0.8%, but you'll see that the correlation is at 48.5, so it's a lot less correlated. It's a lot more noise to this graph. And then really, once you top out there in 2007, you hit a plateau, you start easing off, and the 5-year trend is negative at minus 0.4, but a very low correlation. This one is really hard to select negative trend on, but combined with the frequency that is entirely negative, for medical, we selected a trend of -1.0, NCCI a -1.5. So once again, we're slightly above them, a little more conservative than they are, but definitely in the same neighborhood. And coincidentally, BINAC also selected -1.0. So they actually selected the same trend factors we did. There was no collusion there. We submitted our reports the same day, but it gives me a greater degree of relief to know that that we threw the darts at the same part of the board there. I should never use a dartboard analogy, should I? Okay, so on to LAE. This is a really busy graph, but I think it did a good indication last year of why we were developing that LAE to loss ratio downward from what NCCI was doing. You can see each one of these is an individual year that where this ratio has been projected, and each cluster you can see how it develops over time. So within each cluster you see a downward slope there, and that's what we were seeing. So in the past, we developed it downward, selected a different one, but I'll point you to the circles here. The latest version of this is if 2011 is pretty much flat, 2012 is up, 2013 is up, 2014 is actually up a good bit. So what we've seen is what statisticians might call a reversion to the mean. And having seen that and then pushed through our analysis, for us this time, the impact of selecting something different than NCCI had fallen into the point of immateriality. So we adopted the NCCI factor of 20.1 without adjustment. The other thing before we get off this graph, though, I will point out is that even though within each cluster you see the fall off, if you look at 2011 as a cluster and then look at the clusters going right, they are inching upward. And you see that we've picked a 20.1, which is above a lot of the historical ones. And the reason for that is that there can be, when you have significant loss cost decreases over time, which you have had over the last 4 years, a lot of times some of those LAE, some of those expenses are fixed. They're really not going to come down dollar for dollar with the losses, and so it's not unusual to see that ratio creep up as your underlying loss costs for indemnity and medical come down. So that's not anything alarming, just kind of more of a mathematical effect that you can expect to see when you've been operating in the environment you have. So let's talk experience period. You'll see in this one that NCCI, they use a 2-year experience period, as you're well aware. If you just looked at policy year 2013 and wanted to get a rate indication, you'd be getting minus 12.8. Now, this is just the experience and trend part. It's not some of the other minor modifications we've made. So you'd be looking at a minus 12.8. That's 1 minus 0.872 for 2013. For 2014, very close, minus 13.1. I hope I'm doing all this math right, or nobody's going to believe me. And then as an average, you'd have a minus 12.9, which after the minor adjustments for the other things gets you to your 12.8. So for us, we use five years of experience. We've done this now. This is our 3rd year for doing this. And the reason we do that is we believe that 2 years is certainly quite volatile. And if you're doing a 50-50 weighting, the 1 year will fall off the table that might be bad or might be good, be replaced by another, and we're not sure that that's entirely predictive. A smoother transitionary period for us of 5 years is what we consider best. Again, this is all judgment between actuaries. But instead of going 50-50, we look at five policy years going back, and we basically do a weighted average with the most weight coming with the most recent policy year. So we're going to give 30% to 2014, 25, 20, 15, and 10. And I checked that does add up to 100, so we're good there. Here are your 5 policy year indications. And the first thing I'll point out is on 2013 and 2014, we do sit above NCCI. So even if we took a straight average, we'd be somewhat above them on the indication, but not by too much. But when you add in the 3 years behind it, it tends to what we call temper the indication, the negative indication. So that 1.01 actually indicates a 1% increase, but it's given 10% in our calculation. We feel this is a better transition in a time where obviously things are changing. The 2013 reform, I'm not sure if that's what's behind what we're seeing in the loss development, but it very well could be as claim managers get used to the new rules, and they may start setting lower reserves. But we've also seen that certain times certain reforms can be temporary and overturned and might have a reverse effect after a few years. So we feel it's prudent then to phase it in and not let a year that's 2 years old then just fall off the table and crash on the floor, but let it slide off the table and get less weight as time goes on while we give more to the more recent years. Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Hudgens?
You referred to the 2013 reforms, which really didn't go into effect until July 1, 2014.
Right.
So there's only 6 months of experience. So when you consider there's only 6 months experience, and when you consider whether this overall trend, even without the reform, that it's been down, would that not argue for at least maybe a 3-year, if you're trying to be conservative rather than going back to 5 years? If you go all the way back to 5 years, are you not artificially adding cost in that are not indicated?
Yes, it's possible. We're giving less weight to the older years. Again, it's a judgment call, and a lot of times, a lot of what I've read in the reform might actually impact some older claims just in the way that the law is interpreted and things like that. So we feel that's appropriate. You're correct about when that went into effect, and we should see more and more. Like all of the new claims will be by the new rules, and so it won't be that these runoff claims will be they're partially affected. The new ones will be completely affected, but we should see that impacts the trends as well. So when we're selecting negative trends and things like that, that gets worked in as well. Any other questions? Okay.
Chris, with the situation with 2013, with the big reduction in the 3 claims and the reduction in the incurred values and the ultimate values, coupled with the fact that we've had reform as of 7/1/14, do you feel like you have more justification for looking at the data on a 5-year basis, or less justification, or about the same?
I would say about the same. I think everything that can be quantified has been quantified. There are things that are just not quantifiable, and that's really when we're talking about the judgment versus the method. As Mary Jean said, it's we understand why they have a methodical approach to it, and with very, very little variation. And when they do make a variation, it has to be something like we saw in that loss development graph. But that's where we seem, as reviewing actuaries, to have a little more freedom to use that judgment. And so if it looks like the reforms of 7/1/2014 are really accelerating the downward growth, then we're free to reflect that more fully in a more immediate way. So I still think each year I look at this, and it's not a weighting scheme that is, I would say, is common in workers' compensation. It's really learned more from homeowners, but it is common in actuarial work to give the most recent year the greatest weight and then let it go down. By the numbers used, 4 years, so they're at a 25, 25, 25, 25, and if a particularly good or bad year falls off the back of there, with 25% weight, it'll hit a little harder than this will, but it's still not a 2-year. The 50-50 is what really can swing things. I just have fundamental concerns, and they're not founded necessarily on what I see in the numbers. I'll say that, but I have concerns that if we're seeing emerging trends that may reverse themselves, I don't want to sit here with a plus 12.8. So that's another consideration for a longer experience period as you step into it. That it gives things time to take hold and in an orderly way, rather than being blindsided a couple years later by something you thought was there that wasn't. Okay. Any more questions before I go on? just a couple more slides, and we'll be done. So here's our average, the weighted average. And so you'll see that's a minus 8.8 for the experience, and sits about 4 points above where NCCI is. So to recap the major actuarial assumptions and indications, we are at a 5-year average loss development now, up from a 3-year. NCCI is at a 5-year average incurred and a 2-year average paid. Basically, by the numbers, is judgmental and is selecting factors on a factor by factor basis. We did also make that one modification to that one outlier of a factor. We adopted the NCCI factors without adjustment this year. As we had stated earlier, our trends were minus 4.5 indemnity versus minus 5 for NCCI, and minus 1 for medical versus minus 1.5 for NCCI. We reverted to the LAE to loss ratios that NCCI used, and we used what we've used in the past 2 years, a 5-year kind of a reverse weighted experience period with the most weight given to the most recent policy year. Overall, when all of the other minor adjustments are added in, we're looking at an overall indication of minus 8.7% versus NCCI's minus 12.8%. I will echo Mary Jean's comments that this does not imply that we feel that NCCI's estimates are unreasonable. In fact, we feel they would fall within what we consider a range of reasonable actuarial methods and assumptions. To round out what I'm saying, it is an extremely high bar to say that that actuarial assumptions are unreasonable, for me anyway. And I think most actuaries agree that in the areas of judgment, these things can have a lot of swing, and you see that. But I 100% support the NCCI filing. I think it's reasonable. I think ours is more reasonable by definition. So.
Okay.
Any questions?
Mr. Burkhalter, thank you for that. Any questions of Mr. Burkhalter? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
For your good presentation. All right, next one is item 4C on the agenda, the response and comments on behalf of NCCI, Anne-Marie Smith. Okay, you're recognized, Ms. Smith.
So good afternoon. My name is Anne-Marie Smith. I'm a director and actuary with the NCCI, your third actuary for today. So when we spoke about the filing in August, we went through the entire filing as an overview. Today, I plan to focus more on the topics that were going to be brought up by the consulting actuaries, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you have on the filing. So we'll start with, in general, as you've heard a couple times today, the main drivers have been the experience period was very favorable in policy years 2013 and 2014. We have seen improvement in our development factors, which are those numbers that take those immature losses that we see in 2013 and 2014 and estimate that ultimate value of what that loss is going to be. Continued claim frequency has prompted us to lower the trend factors in this filing. And again, as you've heard already, the loss adjustment expense has seemed to stabilize in the most recent filing. So we'll talk through each one of these. So in the presentation in August and in the breakdown that you saw earlier today from Mary Jean, we had the experience and development kind of lumped together, but since those have been two different topics today that have been discussed in this breakdown, I separated out the change in experience and the change in development along with all the other pieces that you've seen in the presentations earlier as well. So you can see that the primary driver has been the change in experience in those policy years 2013 and 2014. The improvements that we've seen in development have been close to 2% of that decrease as well. And then the next biggest change is our change in trend. So looking at the experience period, you've seen this chart in general a couple of times already, with 2010 being the highest loss ratio that you see out of all 5 years. Then 2011 and 2012 are the next two highest loss ratios that we see. And then 2013 and 2014 have come in as the lower ones. And I've circled 2013 and 2014 because that is the experience period that NCCI has filed in this filing. So there's been talk of, when there's volatility in what you're seeing, you should consider a longer experience period. But when I look at 2013 and 2014, those 2 years don't look volatile to me. They look very similar to each other. So had the experience in those 2 years been indicating very different things, then I think you could argue that you need to go a little further back and introduce some volatility. But when it's an indication of this is where your experience may be heading, I think you have to lean a little more towards the most recent experience and not go out of our way to include the older years that may not be as representative of the filing period that we're making loss cost for. So just one thing to keep in mind, anytime that you are expanding that experience period, you go back 3 years, 4 years, or 5 years, and it can be warranted in volatile situations, you're also opening up that length of trend. So now you're using that 2010 policy year experience to then predict what's going to happen in the effective period that starts in 2017 and rolls all the way through February of 2018. So when you take a step that far back, you are introducing stability because it's more years, but you're also increasing the amount of time over which you're trying to make that prediction, which may not be as representative as what we're seeing in the more recent experience. So again, 2013 and 2014, in our mind, is the best representation of what we expect to see going forward. So there's also been some talk of the improvement in policy year 2013 from last filing to this filing. And as was noted, there have been a couple of very large claims that settled for different reasons in that policy year. So the graph you're looking at here is a summary of the large loss claims that we collect. So we have a data call that just collects claim data for losses over $500,000. And from one valuation to the next, the claims that are in there can change a bit, since some could just creep over the $5,000 mark and some can creep under. But generally, from valuation to valuation, the bulk of the claims is pretty similar once you get past the early maturities. So in the blue-green bars, you'll see what we had as of the last valuation, and then in the yellow bars, you'll see what we have as of this valuation. And it's the total indemnity and medical paid and case values. So for 2010 and 11 and 12, you could see we saw some slight increases in those large claims, which is to be expected. In 2013, there was a decrease, and that is what prompted those improvements in 2013. So it's not necessarily volatility, it's improvement in the experience that we're seeing, and we feel compelled to reflect it. So if the losses are there, then they're included in the filing. If they improve, then we have to reflect the most recent set of data. So it's unusual to have it so big in that 1 year so early on, but that is where the data is now. And looking at the 2014 values, they're coming in kind of similar to what we've seen in the past. So then we've also heard discussion of development factors. NCCI recommends a 2-year average of paid development factors because paid development is generally pretty stable and it helps you be responsive to the most recent paid development patterns. And then for Paid+Case, we recommend a 5-year average because they can be a little more volatile, so we want to make sure that we're stable from year to year. So what you're looking at in this chart are the development factors that are used for the most immature policy year in the experience period to develop it from that first report all the way out to the final report. And then in the second graph, the factors for the second policy year, what the factors would change from last valuation to this valuation. If you compare what we saw last valuation to what we saw this valuation, there are improvements in almost every one of those. Indemnity paid, medical paid. I wouldn't say they're that remarkable or profound. There are improvements, but they're just how the data is coming in. The most recent diagonal is coming in lower than the diagonals that are dropping off, and we want to reflect that. So that's the improvement that's underlying that 2% impact on the indication. So then moving towards trend, on the next 2 slides, we'll look at indemnity loss ratios and medical loss ratios, and this is what we review when we're trying to select those trend factors. And again, these are the factors that bridge the gap between the data that we see in 2013 and 2014 and the data that we expect to see in 2017 in that policy period, so across that whole time period. For these indemnity to loss ratios, they've come down quite a bit over time. And we look at different exponential fits. So we look at just the most recent 5 years and see what those are telling us, the most recent 8 years, 12 years, and then the whole 15-year fit, and see what it's being indicated based on those different looks. A longer term is inherently going to give you more stability because every year you're only dropping off one of 15 points and bringing on a new one. The 5 years a little more volatile, but it's also more responsive. So as you're moving into a new loss environment, it's going to catch your changes quicker. So last year's trend selection in our filing was -4%. Based on the fits that we see this year, -4% is nowhere in the range. And the half-point decrease that, we lost someone. The half-point decrease that's been recommended by both consulting actuaries, it gets you, it's in the range only if you use all 15 points on the graph. So if you look at the 5-point and 8-point graphs, or exponential fits, you can see there is justification to go even lower than that 5%. So we want to move the trends, we want to be in the range, we want to be indicative of the environment we expect to see, but we don't want to go so far as that 5-point trend, but we feel very comfortable going the full point down to -5%. And then for the medical loss ratios, it's kind of the same story. Again, frequency is the big driver underlying both of these, so it's not surprising that the stories would be somewhat similar. For medical, we haven't seen quite as big of a decrease over that same time period, but it has been a decrease. Again, our trend factor in the last filing was a decrease of 0.5%. Once again, it's not in the range at all of any of the fits that we looked at. The -1% that's being recommended by both consulting actuaries is only in the range if you use those 15 points. So we felt comfortable going the full point to -1.5%. And again, looking at the more recent fits, you could justify going further, but we feel a 1-point drop is sufficient for this year. So we're mindful of the fact that the policy year experience came in lower. We're mindful of the fact that the trends indicate something even bigger of a decrease than what we're filing, but we are keeping those two things in mind when we make our recommendations so that we don't go too far too fast. And then lastly, for the countrywide loss adjustment expense, as you've seen a couple times today, these are the projections for the countrywide LAE from last valuation to this valuation for the most recent 4 accident years for where we can do the comparison, and then the most recent estimate for 2015. And the estimates from last valuation and this valuation are pretty consistent with each other. And then to derive the Tennessee LAE provision, we use a relativity off of the countrywide DCCE portion to make it Tennessee specific, and then we use the countrywide adjusting and other value to come up with the 20.1. So this is a repeat of what you saw in August. I just wanted to have it here so that you would have the calculation if there were questions. So then finally, this is just a summary of the filing activity that we've had over the past few years. All the effective dates that you see, 3/1 in the various years, are all our experience filings. The other two that you see, the 7/1/2014 and the 8/28/2016, are due to law changes or benefit changes. So in general, you have had good experience here. We have had several years of decreases. The -0.9 in 2016 is just a slight decrease, and now here we are at -12.8. Yes.
Ms. Hudgens is right.
Just a fundamental question. If you look back over your shoulder and you look at the recommendations you have made each year, and then you look at the experience that followed that recommendation, how close have you all been in estimating what the costs, what the expenses would be compared to what you projected that they would be?
The expenses or just the overall filing? How good have we done?
The overall filing and the overall experience.
So if everything flowed through as we predicted, so losses came in right according to those development factors and just as we predicted, you would essentially see a filing year after year that reflects what that indicated trend was. So if the trends indicate a decrease, you would continue to see a decrease each year based on those trends. So if it's a bigger decrease, then maybe we shot a little too high in the past. If it's a lesser of a decrease, maybe we shot it a little too low. So in the negative 0.9 last year, may be partially driven by that policy year 2013 that had those 30 large claims and some other things that has since improved. So there's been some argument today that, well, now that really improved, maybe it's too low. Well, maybe it started too high, and that's what kept last year's filing closer to 0 instead of closer to where our indicated trends would be. So the negative 12.8 might be kind of resetting at this point. But generally, if you're right from year to year, you would just see a filing where the impact of 1 year of trend. So it would be a decrease in this situation.
Any other questions? Thank you. Or Mr. Mayo? Mr. Mayo is recognized.
It's easier to drop the rates than it is to raise them. And my concern is we're running awful fast, awful quick to drop the rates the way they are. I would urge the council to take that into consideration when they look at the rates.
Okay. Any other comments or questions from Ms. Smith? Thank you very much for your
Thank you.
presentation. All right, the floor is now open for comments on possible recommendations by the council or other actions. Mr. Pitts, you still with us?
Yes, sir.
All right.
I'll make a motion.
All right, Mr. Dove's recognized.
Given the information that's been presented today, I recommend that we adopt the NCCI
All right.
recommendation as proposed.
All right. Okay. All right, we have a second by Mr. Garrett. Motion by Mr. Dove, second by Mr. Garrett. Any discussion on that motion? Yeah. Jerry Mayo's been our oracle over here to keep us straight on that. So, all right, very good then. We have a motion and a second. I'll ask Mr. Scroggs to call the roll of the voting members of the council.
Mr. Dove. Aye. Mr. Garrett. Aye. Mr. Pitts. Aye. Mr. Schaefer. Aye. Mr. Selby.
Okay, it's unanimous in favor of the motion. Motion is adopted. All right, is there further business to come before the council at this point today? Chair sees none, so we don't have a meeting scheduled for the future right at the moment, but we'll be in touch as the need arises here going towards the legislative session. Thank you very much for your service, and I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. We have a motion to adjourn. Is there a second? Second, all right. Without objection, council stands adjourned. Thank you very much. Have a great afternoon.